Welcome to Dreamed History, where every chapter feels like a dream. Tonight, we step back in time to explore a kingdom that stood the test of 1,000 years, guarding its borders against waves of invaders and rivals. This was no ordinary empire. It was the Byzantine Empire, an empire that, while often overshadowed by its Roman predecessor, crafted some of the most advanced military strategies the world had ever seen. Imagine a time when the great city of Constantinople stood as the heart of a realm stretching from the edges of Europe to the deserts of Asia. An empire encircled by enemies, Arab caliphates, Slavic tribes, and later the relentless rise of the Turkish forces. Yet, against all odds, it survived. How? Through the careful application of military brilliance, strategic alliances, and, above all, an understanding that in war, it's not always the might of your army that determines victory, but the strength of your mind. In this journey tonight, we'll uncover how the Byzantines, the heirs of the Roman Empire, crafted military strategies that were not just about battles, but about diplomacy, intelligence, and a keen sense of timing. We'll explore the role of their renowned generals, their innovative use of weapons like the Greek fire, and the strategic brilliance that made them the masters of the Mediterranean for centuries. But before we begin, if you're enjoying this journey through history, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more tales from the past. Now, let's dive into the heart of the Byzantine Empire and uncover the secrets behind their military prowess. The story of Byzantine military strategy begins long before their great victories. The empire was born from the ashes of the Roman Empire, inheriting both its grandeur and its military traditions. But it was in the eastern part of the empire, where the capital, Constantinople, stood, that the Byzantines refined their methods of war. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive. Byzantium's strategic location, perched on the border between Europe and Asia, placed it at the crossroads of trade, politics, and military conflict. It was here, in this melting pot of cultures and traditions, that the Byzantines were able to mould a military that would endure for centuries, adapting to the ever-changing landscape of warfare. A new beginning, adapting Roman tactics for a changing world. One of the first things that set Byzantium apart was its ability to adapt. Unlike the Roman legions, which had relied heavily on brute force and discipline, the Byzantines understood that survival required flexibility. Their early military strategies focused on defensive fortifications, often using their geography to their advantage. Constantinople itself was built on a peninsula, surrounded by water on 3 sides and protected by massive walls on the 4th. These natural defences made the city nearly impregnable for centuries. But Byzantium's true brilliance lay in its adaptation of Roman tactics, blending them with newer, more dynamic strategies to face a host of different enemies. They didn't rely solely on one type of unit, but integrated infantry, cavalry, and naval forces, making them more versatile than any other force of the time. This allowed them to engage in multi-theatre warfare, defending both land and sea from multiple threats. One of the first military reforms under the Byzantine emperors was the creation of the theme system. The Byzantine Empire was divided into provinces called themes, each governed by a military commander. This decentralized structure allowed the empire to respond quickly to threats on all fronts, creating a highly responsive and flexible military apparatus. It was a revolutionary approach that gave Byzantium a strategic advantage over more centralized empires of the time. The mastery of cavalry and infantry. The Byzantine army was composed of a variety of specialized forces, each contributing to the empire's unique military strategy. Among these were the famous cataphracts, heavily armoured cavalry that could charge through enemy lines with devastating force. These warriors were not only well trained but also heavily equipped, riding horses armoured in metal and wielding long spears. The cataphracts were used primarily as shock troops, tasked with breaking enemy formations and creating chaos on the battlefield. However, the Byzantines didn't rely solely on their cavalry. Infantry played a significant role as well, with specialised units that included archers, spearmen, and even Greek fire throwers, a weapon that would forever change naval warfare and give Byzantium an edge in defence. The Byzantines also introduced a concept known as the mixed formation, a combination of heavy and light infantry, cavalry, and even missile troops that could act in concert. This allowed them to outmaneuver enemies who relied on one-dimensional units. The flexibility of their formations was key to their success in battle. The integration of navy forces into their military strategy was another key element that set Byzantium apart. Unlike other empires that relied solely on land forces, the Byzantine Empire had a highly developed naval fleet that was capable of controlling the Mediterranean. Their ships, particularly the dromon, were fast, maneuverable, and heavily armed with Greek fire, a flammable liquid that could burn on water. This naval superiority allowed Byzantium to project power across the Mediterranean and defend its empire from seafaring invaders. Perhaps the most famous innovation in Byzantine military history was Greek fire, a weapon that struck terror into the hearts of their enemies. First used in the 7th century, Greek fire was a flammable liquid that could be ignited and projected from special siphons mounted on ships or walls. It was capable of burning on water, making it an incredibly effective weapon in naval battles. The precise formula for Greek fire was a closely guarded secret, and its use on the battlefield gave Byzantium a strategic edge over the rest of the world for centuries. The Byzantines used Greek fire not only to defend Constantinople, but also to gain naval dominance over the Mediterranean. Their control of the seas allowed them to carry out raids on enemy coastal cities, ensuring that no rival power could challenge their supremacy on the water. While Byzantium's military strength was formidable, the empire's real genius lay in its ability to combine military force with diplomacy. Unlike their enemies, who often resorted to outright war, the Byzantines used diplomacy as a weapon of choice. They were experts in maneuvering alliances, paying tribute to rival powers when necessary, and using marriage as a tool to secure peace with neighbouring states. This diplomacy was often backed by a network of spies and informants that allowed the Byzantines to gather intelligence on their enemies. The Byzantine court was a hotbed of intrigue, with ambassadors and spies operating in the shadows to keep the empire one step ahead of its rivals. The strategic use of intelligence and diplomacy allowed the Byzantines to manage multiple threats without always resorting to battle. They understood that war was a last resort and that a skilled negotiator could win battles long before they were fought. Byzantium's control of the seas was essential to its military strategy. With its strategic location between Europe and Asia, controlling the Bosphorus Strait and the Mediterranean was crucial for both trade and defence. The Byzantine navy played a pivotal role in securing these waters, ensuring that the empire could maintain its dominance over its enemies. The dromon was the backbone of the Byzantine fleet, a fast and agile warship that could carry heavy loads of Greek fire. This allowed the Byzantines to strike fear into their enemies, using their naval superiority to dictate terms in battle. Their mastery of naval warfare kept Constantinople safe from sieges for centuries, and their influence over the Mediterranean helped them maintain their position as the dominant power in the region. What truly distinguished Byzantine military strategy was its adaptability. The Byzantines were constantly forced to evolve their tactics and strategies to meet new challenges. As they faced invasions from the Arabs, Slavs, and later the Turks, the Byzantine military adapted by developing new forms of warfare, reorganizing their armies, and constantly evolving their defensive tactics. This ability to adapt was one of the reasons the Byzantine Empire endured for so long, despite the many external threats it faced. Their approach to warfare was not just about winning battles, it was about maintaining stability over 1,000 years. And in doing so, the Byzantines created a model for sustainable warfare that balanced military power with diplomacy, intelligence, and innovation. In the first chapter, we explored how the Byzantine Empire laid the foundations for a military strategy that would sustain it for centuries. Now, let's delve into the heart of their military system, the organization and evolution of their forces, which allowed them to stay resilient in the face of ever-changing threats. Byzantine military strategy wasn't just about battle tactics. It was about the organization of the empire's forces, the way they adapted to both external and internal challenges, and how they responded to new enemies, changing technologies, and shifting geopolitical landscapes. A critical component of their success lay in their ability to adapt quickly and efficiently, reorganizing their military to meet the needs of the time. One of the most important innovations in Byzantine military organization was the theme system. This decentralized structure divided the empire into provinces known as themes, each of which was responsible for its own defense. The theme system allowed the Byzantines to maintain a highly mobile and responsive military force, which was crucial in a time when enemies were constantly encroaching on their borders. Each theme was governed by a strategos, a military governor responsible for organizing and commanding the local troops. These commanders had the authority to raise their own armies and manage the region's defenses. The Byzantine emperor, in turn, could call upon these regional forces when needed, ensuring that the empire could mobilize quickly and efficiently in times of war. This system proved to be highly effective as it allowed the Byzantine military to react quickly to external threats while maintaining internal stability. The theme system also had economic benefits, as it encouraged local support for the military. Soldiers and officers were often rewarded with land, providing them with a vested interest in the defense of their region. This helped to ensure that the military remained loyal and motivated, even during periods of internal instability or external threat. Byzantine military forces were made up of a wide variety of troops, each designed to address different aspects of warfare. The army was composed of heavy infantry, light infantry, cavalry, and specialized units such as archers, artillery, and, of course, Greek fire throwers. The heavy infantry of the Byzantine army, known as tagmata, were the backbone of the army. These soldiers were equipped with armor and shields, ready to hold the line during major battles. They formed the center of the Byzantine military formation and were typically supported by light infantry archers and spearmen who could harass the enemy from a distance or provide flanking support. Cavalry played a significant role in Byzantine warfare, as we mentioned earlier with the cataphracts. But Byzantium's cavalry wasn't limited to heavy units. They also employed light cavalry units, which were highly mobile and used to scout enemy movements, deliver quick strikes, and disrupt supply lines. This flexibility in their cavalry allowed the Byzantines to tailor their forces to the type of warfare they were facing. A key aspect of the Byzantine army was its use of specialized units. One such unit was the Varangian Guard, an elite force composed mostly of Norsemen, whose primary duty was to protect the emperor. They were fiercely loyal and served as both bodyguards and shock troops during battles. Byzantine military units were often highly specialized, with each unit trained for a specific purpose. The Byzantine army didn't rely on brute force. Rather, they focused on strategic placement and flexibility. fighting battles with the goal of weakening and outlasting their enemies, not just defeating them outright. The Byzantine Empire's ability to adapt to new threats was one of the key reasons for its military success. Unlike other empires, whose military tactics became rigid and outdated, the Byzantines were constantly evolving their strategies and adapting to the changing nature of warfare. One of the most notable examples of Byzantine military evolution came in response to the rise of the Turkish threat in the 11th century. The Seljuk Turks had begun to push into Byzantine territory, and their cavalry was proving to be a formidable challenge. In response, the Byzantines adapted their tactics by developing a more mobile and flexible army, capable of confronting the Turkish cavalry with their own cavalry units. The Battle of Manzikert in 1071, however, marked a significant turning point. Despite their tactical evolution, the Byzantines were defeated by the Seljuk Turks, leading to the loss of much of Anatolia. This defeat was a sobering reminder that even the most advanced military systems are vulnerable to change, but it also spurred the Byzantines to innovate further. In the years that followed, the Byzantines turned to mercenaries, a practice that became increasingly common as the empire faced both external threats and internal instability. These mercenaries came from various parts of Europe, including Franks, Italians, and even Arabs, further increasing the Byzantine army's flexibility and adaptability. No discussion of Byzantine military strategy would be complete without mentioning the Byzantine navy. The Byzantine navy was a powerful force, capable of defending Constantinople and projecting power across the Mediterranean. The Byzantines were masters of naval warfare, utilizing advanced tactics and innovations that would ensure their dominance on the seas for centuries. The dromon, a type of warship, was the backbone of the Byzantine fleet. These ships were highly maneuverable and armed with Greek fire, a powerful incendiary weapon that could set enemy ships ablaze. The combination of speed, maneuverability, and firepower made the Byzantine navy a formidable force that could control the Mediterranean and protect the empire from seafaring invaders. But it wasn't just the dromon that made the Byzantine navy so effective. The Byzantines were also skilled in naval tactics, using their ships to create traps, outflank enemies, and disrupt supply lines. In battle, they would often use their ships to encircle the enemy, making it impossible for the opposing forces to escape. This mastery of naval warfare allowed the Byzantines to maintain control over key trade routes and secure their borders for centuries. Byzantine military strategy was not just about winning battles, it was about ensuring the survival of the empire in a world filled with unpredictable and often overwhelming threats. The empire's ability to adapt to new challenges, to combine military force with diplomacy and intelligence, and to innovate constantly was key to its survival for over a millennium. As we move forward, we'll explore the decline of the Byzantine Empire and how its military strategy evolved in response to new threats, including the rise of the Ottoman Empire. But for now, it's clear that the Byzantine military, with its complex organization, its ability to innovate, and its commitment to adaptability, was one of the most advanced and enduring military forces in history. When we think of the Byzantine military's greatest innovations, one weapon stands out above all others: Greek fire. For centuries, it was shrouded in mystery, its formula known only to a few within the empire. It was a weapon of immense power, capable of burning on water, and it struck fear into the hearts of Byzantium's enemies. But Greek fire was more than just a physical weapon, it was also a psychological one. Its use in naval battles and sieges not only inflicted damage on the enemy's fleet and fortifications, but also sent a clear message: Byzantium was not to be underestimated. To understand how Greek fire fit into the empire's military strategy, we must first explore its origins and the critical role it played in securing the empire's borders. Greek fire was invented in the 7th century during the reign of Emperor Constantine IV. The empire was under constant threat from Arab naval forces seeking to expand their empire into the Mediterranean. Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire, was particularly vulnerable to sea-based attacks. To protect it, the Byzantines needed a weapon that could turn the tide of naval warfare in their favour. Legend has it that Greek fire was developed by a Byzantine Greek engineer named Callinicus of Heliopolis, who fled to Constantinople after his city was captured by the Arabs. According to historical accounts, Callinicus presented his invention to the emperor, who immediately recognized its potential. The weapon was designed to be used in naval battles, where its incendiary properties could set enemy ships ablaze. The exact composition of Greek fire remains a mystery to this day. Some historians believe it was made from a mixture of substances like naphtha, quicklime, sulfur, and resin, which, when combined, created a highly flammable substance. The Byzantines developed specialized siphons devices mounted on ships and fortifications that could project Greek fire over great distances, often igniting enemy vessels before they could get close enough to attack. The introduction of Greek fire fundamentally changed the nature of naval warfare. Before its invention, naval battles were largely won by the size of a fleet or the skill of its commanders. However, Greek fire introduced an element of terror that could instantly destroy an enemy's fleet, even if it was larger and more powerful. The Byzantine navy used Greek fire to devastating effect, especially during the Arab sieges of Constantinople in the 7th and 8th centuries. During these sieges, the Arabs attempted to cut off the city's access to the sea, hoping to starve the Byzantines into submission. However, when the Arab fleets tried to approach, the Byzantines unleashed Greek fire, sending enemy ships up in flames and forcing the invaders to retreat. The psychological effect of Greek fire was just as important as its physical power. The sight of enemy ships burning in the water had a profound impact on the morale of the opposing forces. For the Arabs, it was a reminder that no matter how many ships they sent, they could not match the firepower of the Byzantine fleet. For the Byzantines, it was a source of pride. Greek fire was a weapon that gave them a distinct edge over their adversaries, and its secrecy made it even more powerful. Greek fire was not only used to defend Constantinople, but also became a crucial tool in the Byzantine Empire's ability to project power across the Mediterranean. With their mastery of naval warfare, the Byzantines could control vital sea routes, ensuring their dominance over trade and communication. By controlling the seas, they were able to defend against invasions, establish alliances, and launch offensive operations against their enemies. The Byzantine navy was also instrumental in maintaining the Byzantine Empire's political influence. By controlling the seas, they ensured that no foreign power could disrupt trade or communication between the empire's many provinces. This was especially important for the empire's economic and military stability, as resources and reinforcements could be moved quickly by sea. Greek fire, along with the Byzantine navy's speed and agility, made it virtually impossible for invading forces to succeed in a full-scale naval assault on Constantinople. The Byzantines could respond to threats rapidly, even with a smaller fleet, using their superior tactics and their devastating weapon. Greek fire wasn't just a tool for physical destruction, it was also a weapon of psychological warfare. The sheer terror it caused on the battlefield and the seas was immense. As we mentioned before, the sight of enemy ships engulfed in flames would have been demoralizing for even the most experienced sailors. It was a fearsome reminder that the Byzantines controlled the waters and could turn the tide of battle at will. The Byzantines understood the importance of psychological warfare in battle. They were masters of intelligence, often using spies and informants to gather information about enemy movements. Greek fire was part of their broader strategy of intimidation. The Byzantines knew that their enemies, whether they were Arabs, Slavs, or later the Normans, were just as much influenced by fear as by strength. By using Greek fire, they created an aura of invincibility around their navy. Moreover, the weapon's secrecy added to the fear it generated. The formula for Greek fire was a closely guarded state secret, passed down only to a select few. Its mysterious nature made it all the more terrifying, as enemies never knew exactly how it worked or when it would strike. It was a constant reminder that Byzantium held the upper hand when it came to naval warfare. As powerful as Greek fire was, it was not enough to prevent the decline of the Byzantine Empire. By the 12th century, the empire began to suffer from internal instability, economic challenges, and a series of military defeats. The Fourth Crusade in 1204, when Western Crusaders sacked Constantinople, marked a significant blow to the empire's power. The loss of Constantinople to the Crusaders, followed by its eventual capture by the Ottoman Empire in 1453, signalled the end of Byzantine dominance. However, Greek fire remains one of the most iconic innovations in military history. Despite the eventual fall of the empire, the weapon's legacy endured, influencing military technology and naval tactics for centuries. Its impact was felt far beyond the shores of the Mediterranean. The idea of using incendiary weapons would be revisited in later centuries, and the legend of Greek fire would continue to capture the imagination of military engineers and strategists long after the empire had fallen. To this day, the exact composition of Greek fire remains a mystery. Historians and scientists have speculated on its ingredients, but no one has been able to recreate it with certainty. Some believe it was a combination of petroleum, quicklime, and sulfur, while others suggest it was a more complex mixture of chemicals. What we do know is that it was a weapon ahead of its time, so advanced that it gave the Byzantines an edge over their enemies for centuries. The legend of Greek fire persists as a testament to the ingenuity of the Byzantine Empire. It was a weapon that, like the empire itself, was forged from a blend of innovation, adaptability, and strategic brilliance. It was a weapon that changed the course of naval warfare and protected the heart of the Byzantine Empire for over a millennium. As we move forward in this journey through Byzantine history, we'll see how innovations like Greek fire were just one piece of the larger puzzle that kept the empire alive for so long. The weapon's psychological power, its technological sophistication, and its strategic impact all contributed to making the Byzantine Empire one of the most resilient powers in history. In the next chapter, we'll look at how the Byzantines adapted to new challenges as their empire began to face mounting pressures from external enemies. But for now, we can reflect on how Greek fire, with all its mystery and power, was a defining symbol of Byzantine ingenuity, both a weapon of war and a tool of psychological mastery. The Byzantine Empire's strength was not just in its military innovations or its cunning strategies, it was in its ability to adapt. As centuries passed, the empire faced an ever-changing array of enemies. From the relentless Arab invasions to the emerging Turkic powers in the east, and the aggressive Norman invasions from the west. The key to Byzantine survival lay in how it responded to these threats, constantly evolving its military strategy to meet new challenges. At its peak, Byzantium was a fortress surrounded by enemies, yet it continued to thrive. But as time passed, even the most advanced strategies had their limits. In this chapter, we'll explore how the Byzantines adapted to new threats, restructured their military systems, and faced both external aggression and internal instability. We'll also look at how the empire's flexibility in both military tactics and diplomatic maneuvering helped them survive long after their Roman counterparts fell. In the 7th century, Byzantium faced its first major external challenge after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Arab caliphates were rapidly expanding, and the Byzantine Empire was now on the defensive. The Arab invasions posed a serious threat to both the empire's territory and its economic lifeline through control of the Mediterranean. Byzantium's response was a blend of military defense and diplomatic strategies. The Byzantine navy, already skilled in the use of Greek fire, proved to be a key asset in defending against naval raids. On land, the Byzantines adapted by relying more on fortifications and using their cavalry and light infantry to engage in hit-and-run tactics, disrupting the Arab forces without risking direct confrontation. The key to this approach was flexibility. Byzantium avoided large-scale battles when possible, choosing to wear down their enemies over time. But the threat didn't end with the Arabs. In the 9th and 10th centuries, the Slavic tribes began pushing into the empire's northern borders, forcing the Byzantines to shift their focus once again. The Byzantine military adapted by reorganizing its defensive strategy along the Danube River and creating a series of fortified outposts to repel the Slavic incursions. Byzantium's army, though smaller than those of the empires surrounding it, was highly skilled at fighting on its own terms, using its advanced fortifications, swift cavalry, and strategic intelligence to hold off the enemy. But perhaps the most challenging threat came from the Seljuk Turks in the late 11th century, which would forever change the face of the Byzantine Empire. The Battle of Manzikert in 1071 marked a turning point, as the Byzantines suffered a decisive defeat at the hands of the Seljuks. This battle, which saw the capture of Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, exposed the vulnerabilities of the Byzantine military and signalled the beginning of the empire's decline. The defeat at Manzikert was a wake-up call for the Byzantines. While their military had been successful in defending the empire for centuries, they had to adapt and reorganize if they were to survive the changing tides of warfare. The empire responded with military reforms that aimed to create a more mobile and flexible army to deal with the new threats of the Turks and Normans. One of the most significant changes was the reorganization of the Byzantine army into more independent and autonomous units. These units, known as tagmata, were stationed throughout the empire and could be called upon rapidly in times of need. This decentralized approach made the Byzantine military more adaptable, as regional forces could be quickly mobilized to respond to local threats. Additionally, the Byzantines increased their reliance on mercenaries. As the empire's resources became more strained, the use of mercenaries became an important part of the Byzantine military structure. The Byzantines hired Western European knights, Turkic horsemen, and Italian sailors to bolster their forces, creating a multinational military that was both flexible and effective. This diverse force could fight effectively on land and sea, adapting to different styles of warfare. One of the most notable aspects of Byzantine reform was the use of Greek fire and other innovations in siege warfare. The Byzantines continued to develop new techniques for defending against sieges, including the use of flaming arrows, boiling oil, and defensive fortifications that allowed them to withstand prolonged assaults. While Byzantium's military reforms were critical to its survival, diplomacy was just as important. The Byzantine Empire was a master of diplomatic maneuvering, often using marriage alliances, bribery, and strategic treaties to avoid conflicts when possible. The Byzantines were experts at playing rival powers against one another, often making alliances with one enemy to weaken another. For example, in the 10th century, the Byzantines allied with the Rus, Kievan Rus, to help repel the Bulgars, and later used diplomacy to form an alliance with the Seljuk Turks to counter the rising Norman threat. One of the most famous diplomatic moves came in the 12th century when the Byzantine Empire used marriage as a means of solidifying its relationship with the Western Crusaders. The marriage of Empress Anna Komnene to Crusader Prince Raymond of Toulouse was a classic example of how Byzantium used marriage alliances to secure peace and avoid military confrontation. Even though the alliance did not last, it demonstrated the Byzantine knack for political and diplomatic flexibility in a world that was often unpredictable and dangerous. By the 13th century, the Byzantine Empire was in decline. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 marked a devastating blow as crusaders from Western Europe sacked Constantinople, weakening the empire beyond repair. Though Byzantium would continue to exist in some form for another 2 centuries, the once great empire had lost much of its strength, and the rise of the Ottoman Empire sealed its fate. The Ottoman Turks, under Sultan Mehmed II, eventually laid siege to Constantinople in 1453, and the fall of the city marked the end of the Byzantine Empire. Despite their military innovations and adaptability, the Byzantines could not withstand the pressure from the rapidly expanding Ottoman forces. Yet, even in its final moments, Byzantium showed its resilience. The defenders of Constantinople, led by Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, held out for months against an overwhelming Ottoman siege. The use of gunpowder artillery by the Ottomans was one of the key factors that breached the city's walls. But even then, the Byzantines' resourcefulness and adaptability gave them a fighting chance. While the Byzantine Empire eventually fell, its military strategies left a lasting legacy. The theme system, flexibility in warfare, and diplomatic acumen are all lessons that can still be applied today. Byzantium's ability to adapt to changing circumstances, whether through military reform, strategic alliances, or technological innovation, allowed it to survive for over 1,000 years, longer than many other empires. The Byzantines understood that warfare was not just about fighting, it was about survival. They knew when to fight, when to negotiate, and how to use their resources wisely. Their adaptive approach to military strategy, their use of Greek fire, and their ability to combine military and diplomatic tactics made them one of the most resilient empires in history. As we reflect on the Byzantine Empire's strategies for survival, we see a remarkable ability to evolve and adapt. Despite the constant pressures from both external enemies and internal challenges, Byzantium managed to endure for centuries. Their military strategies were not just about the strength of their armies, they were about thinking ahead, innovating, and knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. In the next chapter, we'll examine the decline of Byzantium and how the Ottoman Empire eventually overcame the legacy of their military brilliance. But for now, we can reflect on the incredible adaptability that allowed the Byzantines to thrive in a world full of uncertainty and conflict. The Byzantine military was one of the first to integrate diplomacy and intelligence into its strategy, an approach that many later empires would adopt. Unlike other powers that relied purely on military might, the Byzantines knew that war was as much about politics and negotiation as it was about battlefield tactics. Their use of spies, emissaries, and even marriage alliances to secure peace or weaken enemies was groundbreaking. This hybrid approach to warfare, combining both military and diplomatic elements, would influence many European powers in the centuries to come. The Ottomans, who eventually replaced Byzantium as the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean, adopted many aspects of Byzantine military strategy. The Ottoman military structure was deeply influenced by the Byzantine theme system, though it was adapted to fit the needs of a rapidly expanding empire. The Ottomans, like the Byzantines, used a combination of infantry, cavalry, and artillery and integrated siege warfare tactics, many of which had been perfected by the Byzantines. One key example is the Siege of Constantinople in 1453, where the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II used massive gunpowder cannons to breach the ancient walls of the city. This marked a significant turning point in the use of artillery in warfare, a tactic that the Byzantines had already been using in a more limited form for centuries. The Ottoman Empire, in many ways, built on the legacy of Byzantine military ingenuity, applying it in new contexts to create an even more formidable military machine. The fortifications of the Byzantine Empire were among the most advanced of their time. The walls of Constantinople, in particular, were an engineering marvel, designed to withstand sieges from every possible direction. These walls, with their double layers, moats, and strategically placed towers, were a testament to the Byzantine commitment to defence. Even after the fall of Constantinople, many of the military fortifications built by the Byzantines remained in use for centuries. The Byzantine emphasis on fortifications influenced later military architecture, especially in Europe. The use of fortified castles, bastions, and city walls became the norm in many European countries during the medieval period. The Byzantine model of defending a city through a combination of strong walls, watchtowers, and waterways continued to be a vital part of military planning well into the Renaissance. Moreover, the defensive philosophy of the Byzantines, where the goal was not always to defeat an enemy, but to outlast and outsmart them, was adopted by many later powers. The Mamluks in Egypt, for example, used a similar strategy of defending key cities and weakening their enemies through a combination of warfare and diplomacy, much like the Byzantines had done for centuries. The Byzantine navy was a key factor in the empire's ability to control the Mediterranean for over a millennium. The Byzantines developed naval tactics that would shape naval warfare in the Mediterranean for centuries. Their ships, particularly the dromon, were fast and maneuverable, allowing them to engage enemies with speed and precision. Their mastery of naval artillery, specifically Greek fire, gave them a unique advantage over rival fleets. Byzantine naval tactics were passed down to the Venetians and Italians, who were major naval powers in the Mediterranean in the following centuries. The use of fast, maneuverable ships and the emphasis on strategic coastal defences continued to influence naval doctrine long after the fall of Constantinople. The Venetian navy, in particular, would use many of the same strategies and tactics that the Byzantines had pioneered, ensuring that the legacy of Byzantine naval supremacy lived on. Furthermore, the Ottoman Empire, which would become the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean, inherited much of the Byzantine naval structure, particularly the use of heavily armed ships and the incorporation of gunpowder artillery in naval combat. The Ottoman navy would go on to dominate the Mediterranean for centuries, just as the Byzantines had done before them. As much as Byzantium's military innovations shaped the battlefield, their diplomatic strategies had a far-reaching impact on the way empires interacted with one another. The Byzantine Empire was a master of using diplomacy as a tool to maintain its power. The Byzantines understood that alliances were just as important as military victories. They were adept at using marriage alliances, bribery, and intelligence to manage relations with neighbouring empires, often manipulating the balance of power in their favour. This approach influenced the diplomacy of later European empires, such as the Holy Roman Empire and France, who also used a combination of diplomatic marriages, treaties, and covert intelligence to maintain political and military advantage. Perhaps the most lasting aspect of Byzantine diplomacy was its ability to play rival powers against one another. The Byzantines would often form alliances with one enemy to weaken another, a strategy that would become a hallmark of later European powers. This cunning diplomacy became one of the key tools for empires in maintaining balance and avoiding total conflict. Though the Byzantine Empire eventually fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, its military innovations, fortifications, and diplomatic strategies left an indelible mark on history. The legacy of the Byzantine military can be seen in the Ottoman Empire, the Venetians, and even modern military theory. Their ability to adapt to new threats, combine military power with diplomacy, and innovate constantly made them one of the most enduring empires in history. Byzantium's legacy is also reflected in the continued study of their tactics and strategies. Military historians and strategists still look to the Byzantine Empire for lessons in flexibility, adaptability, and the importance of integrating military and diplomatic efforts. The Byzantine military system serves as a reminder that survival often depends not just on the strength of your army, but on the ability to adapt to changing circumstances and use every tool at your disposal. As we conclude this chapter, we can reflect on the remarkable resilience of the Byzantine Empire and the enduring impact of its military strategies. Their ability to innovate, adapt, and combine military prowess with diplomacy ensured that Byzantium lasted far longer than many other empires. Even today, the lessons of Byzantine warfare and strategy resonate in the way modern militaries approach both battle and diplomacy. In the next chapter, we'll examine the final years of Byzantium and its ultimate fall to the Ottoman Empire. But for now, we can look back on the extraordinary military legacy that continues to influence the world even after the empire's end. The Byzantine Empire stood at the crossroads of Europe and Asia for over a millennium, its military prowess and strategic ingenuity keeping it one of the most formidable powers in the Mediterranean world. But even the most advanced military strategies and the most brilliant leaders could not protect Byzantium from the inevitable pressures of time. By the 13th century, internal conflicts, economic strain, and a series of devastating military defeats had weakened the empire beyond repair. This chapter delves into the final years of Byzantium, its decline, and the eventual fall of Constantinople. Despite its military innovations, the empire was no longer the same force it had once been. But as we explore this period, we'll also reflect on the tragic lessons of Byzantine resilience and how even the greatest empires can falter when confronted with changing times and overwhelming forces. In 1204, a critical blow was dealt to the Byzantine Empire, one that would permanently alter the course of its history. The Fourth Crusade, originally intended to recapture Jerusalem from Muslim control, instead turned inward and launched an attack on the heart of the Byzantine Empire itself. Led by Western Crusaders, the sacking of Constantinople marked a catastrophic turning point. The Crusaders, driven by greed and political motives, breached the walls of the city, looted its treasures, and destroyed much of its infrastructure. The Byzantine Empire was left in tatters, and Constantinople was temporarily turned into the capital of the Latin Empire. This event left the empire fractured, with Byzantine territories scattered and divided between various factions. The loss of Constantinople, both symbolically and strategically, devastated the Byzantine Empire's ability to resist future invasions. The Crusaders may have temporarily weakened Byzantium, but they also unwittingly paved the way for the rise of the Ottoman Empire, who would later claim the city as their own. After the sacking of Constantinople, the remnants of the Byzantine Empire tried to hold on to their legacy. For the next several decades, the Byzantine Empire was divided into smaller, weakened states. However, despite these setbacks, the Byzantine heartland, the Despotate of Epirus, and the Empire of Nicaea fought to reclaim Constantinople. The Empire of Nicaea, under the leadership of Emperor John III Ducas Vatatzes, represented the last hope for Byzantium. In 1261, the Nicaean forces, led by Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos, managed to recapture Constantinople, restoring the Byzantine Empire to its former glory, albeit briefly. The new emperor, Michael VIII, had to focus on rebuilding the empire from the ashes of the Crusaders' destruction, a monumental task in a world where Byzantium's power had already waned. Even with this short-lived recovery, the empire's internal weaknesses remained. Economic collapse, rising regional powers, and an increasingly fragmented political structure prevented any chance of returning to the glory days of the past. Military reforms were too little, too late. And in many ways, the Byzantines were fighting an uphill battle against not just external enemies, but the changing geopolitical landscape of the time. By the late 14th century, a new power had emerged in the east, the Ottoman Turks. Led by Sultan Mehmed II, the Ottomans were rising quickly, and they brought with them new military tactics, including the use of gunpowder artillery, a technology the Byzantines were unfamiliar with at the time. The Ottoman forces began to encroach on Byzantine territory, steadily conquering parts of the empire's holdings in Asia Minor and the Balkans. The Byzantines attempted to defend their remaining territories, but their military was no match for the rising Ottoman Empire. The Battle of Kosovo, 1389, while a brief reprieve, showed just how badly the Byzantines had been weakened. Though they won minor victories, their resources were stretched thin, and they couldn't sustain the momentum. By 1453, the Ottoman Empire had surrounded Constantinople. The city, once an impenetrable fortress, was now a shadow of its former self. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, who had no choice but to defend the city, faced overwhelming odds. Despite the Byzantine use of fortifications, desperate calls for help from the West, and their resilience during the siege, it was clear that the once great empire could no longer stand on its own. On the 29th of May, 1453, after a 53-day siege, the Ottoman forces finally breached the walls of Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire. The fall of the city marked the final chapter in the Byzantine struggle for survival, but it also marked a new era, the rise of the Ottoman Empire as the dominant power in the region. The fall of Constantinople was not only the end of an empire, but also the end of an era in military history. The Ottomans had used gunpowder, artillery, siege warfare, and advanced tactics, overcoming the Byzantine defences. The Byzantines had been aware of the power of gunpowder for centuries, but they were too slow to adapt to the rapid technological advancements that would change the nature of warfare forever. For the last time, the Byzantine military demonstrated its resilience. The defenders fought valiantly, but their forces were vastly outnumbered, and the empire's military systems, despite their effectiveness in the past, had become outdated in the face of new threats. The fall of Constantinople was the end of the Byzantine Empire, but it also serves as a reminder of the resilience that defined the empire for centuries. Despite the many challenges, internal strife, external enemies, and economic difficulties, the Byzantines managed to hold on for far longer than anyone had anticipated. They adapted, innovated, and fought with unmatched intelligence. But in the end, the changing nature of warfare and the rise of new powers proved to be insurmountable. The Ottoman Empire, which succeeded Byzantium, would go on to dominate the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries. But the lessons of the Byzantines, their strategy, their diplomacy, and their innovation left a mark on military history that cannot be ignored. The Byzantine legacy continued to influence military strategies for generations, and even in their final moments, their commitment to strategic defense and diplomacy remained a testament to their enduring strength. The walls of Constantinople may have fallen, but the ideas of resilience, adaptability, and innovation that the Byzantine Empire embodied would live on. As we reflect on the fall of the Byzantine Empire, we understand that the empire's decline was not due to a lack of military strategy or innovation. The Byzantines were still able to adapt and fight to the very end, but they faced enemies that had evolved and outpaced them in terms of technology and military tactics. As the dust settled over Constantinople on that fateful day in 1453, the Byzantine Empire came to an end. Yet, in many ways, the legacy of the Byzantines continues to resonate through history, their military strategies, innovations, and diplomatic methods influencing countless empires and modern warfare. The fall of Constantinople was a moment of great tragedy, but it was also a moment of transition, a shift in power that would shape the future of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire, which emerged from the ashes of Byzantium, inherited many aspects of Byzantine military and cultural practices. But even in defeat, Byzantium's impact on military theory, strategic thinking, and diplomacy endured. One of the lasting contributions of the Byzantine Empire was its innovative use of Greek fire. Although the weapon was lost to history, its influence on naval warfare can still be seen today. The use of incendiary weapons to gain control over the seas was revolutionary, and the Byzantine Navy's strategic use of speed, firepower, and maneuverability would shape naval tactics for centuries. The Ottoman Navy, for example, carried forward much of the Byzantine Navy's approach to naval dominance, particularly in their mastery of naval artillery and siege tactics. The Byzantine military also made significant contributions to fortification design, particularly in the walls of Constantinople, which withstood numerous sieges over the centuries. The walls themselves were a marvel of engineering, and their design would influence future fortress construction in Europe and the Near East. Even after the fall of Constantinople, the principles of defensive architecture employed by the Byzantines remained a cornerstone of military defense for centuries. But beyond the physical innovations, the strategic thinking of the Byzantines, especially their focus on diplomacy and intelligence, was perhaps the most enduring element of their military legacy. Byzantium showed the world that war was not always about brute force. It was about outthinking your opponent, using alliances, espionage, and psychological warfare to achieve victory. This understanding of warfare as a multifaceted endeavour, involving not just weapons, but also political manoeuvring and intelligence, continues to be a central theme in modern military strategy. Byzantine diplomacy was a force in and of itself. The empire's ability to negotiate with enemies, broker alliances, and maintain stability through strategic marriages and bribery was a testament to their diplomatic skill. In many ways, this approach influenced the way empires operated in the early modern period, and the Ottoman Empire, the successor to Byzantium, would continue many of these practices. Even the Venetians and Mamluks borrowed from Byzantine methods, using diplomacy to bolster military power. The key takeaway from Byzantine diplomacy was their emphasis on balance, knowing when to fight, when to negotiate, and when to use deception or alliances to gain the upper hand. This delicate balance between warfare and diplomacy would become a hallmark of European power politics, especially in the Renaissance and later periods. The fall of the Byzantine Empire serves as a reminder of the fragility of even the most resilient of powers. The empire's inability to keep pace with the changing nature of warfare, particularly with the rise of gunpowder and artillery, ultimately led to its downfall. The Ottoman Turks, with their advanced use of artillery and siege tactics, were able to breach the once impenetrable walls of Constantinople, marking the end of a 1,000-year legacy. Yet, the lesson here is not one of failure, but of adaptation. The Byzantines fought valiantly to the end, using every tool at their disposal to resist the Ottoman siege. Their fortifications, naval tactics, and strategic diplomacy were all part of the final stand, showing that even in defeat, they remained true to their strategic roots. The legacy of the Byzantine Empire, particularly its military and diplomatic innovations, continues to shape modern strategy and thought. From the use of intelligence and espionage to the integration of diplomacy with military force, many of the principles the Byzantines pioneered are still relevant today. The empire's ability to sustain a complex, multifaceted military structure that combined land and sea power was unmatched in its time and served as a model for future empires, particularly during the Renaissance. Though the Ottomans ultimately surpassed them, the Byzantine legacy of strategic resilience remains a source of inspiration for military leaders, historians, and strategists. The empire's story is not one of defeat, but of endurance of a civilization that, against all odds, shaped the world around it for over 1,000 years. As we conclude our journey through the Byzantine Empire's military history, we can see that their innovations in warfare, their mastery of defense, their diplomatic cunning, and their ability to adapt left a profound impact on the world. The Byzantines may have fallen, but their legacy lives on, not just in the empires that followed, but in the strategies that continue to shape global politics and military thinking today. The fall of the Byzantine Empire is a reminder that even the greatest civilizations are vulnerable to the passage of time, but it is also a testament to their enduring influence. Their strategies, ingenuity, and resilience offer valuable lessons for us all. The Byzantine Empire, though gone, is far from forgotten.